The views expressed on the following broadcasts do not necessarily reflect those of KHLT, Take 12 Radio, or our affiliates. The opinions on this show should not be considered as medical, psychological, or professional advice and are those of the host, co-host, and guest. Take 12 Radio and KHLT Recovery Broadcasting are not affiliated with any particular 12-step fellowship.
One day at a time with its failures and fears, with portion of pain and burden of care, we must meet.
Welcome to Walking Through the Language of the Heart, a journey into the Grapevine writings of Alcoholics Anonymous co-founder Bill W. And now, here are your co-hosts, Chris S. and the Monty'man.
Well, there y'all are. Welcome aboard. Welcome to another episode of Walking Through the Language of the Heart. Our good friend Chris S. is on the line with us for this episode entitled, What is the Third Legacy? Now, if you've been with us up to this point, you probably have figured that out, right, Chris?
So he's going to tell us what he's told us.
Yeah.
Like 13 ways for Sunday. But you know, the cool thing is every time he tells us, he further develops it, or, you know, it's a more cohesive description, you know, so it's always worth checking out.
Yeah, you bet. Now, just for the listener's sake, who may have not tuned into this podcast previous to this, you live where?
I live in a little town in northwestern New Jersey, near the Delaware Water Gap. It's a town called Blairstown, New Jersey.
Blairstown, New Jersey. And I live in Albany, Oregon, which is about an hour and 15 minutes south of Portland, Oregon. So we're on both sides or both ends of the country, so to speak, through the magic of internet technology. And you can say what you want about social media and the internet, but there's some good stuff going on, and we're just so grateful that we've been able to do this with you year after year.
Yeah, we've been friends for a long time, Monty, and at opposite ends of the country.
Yeah.
You know, I'm glad we're in the age of technology. I really am.
Me too. All right, let's get started, shall we?
Absolutely. Okay, so where we're at is we're at June 1955, and Bill has done a lot of work on the architecture of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he's been tireless putting together the processes and procedures, which are basically the traditions and the concepts, in a way that he believes will ensure the survival of the organization. So we're going to July 1955, and the title of the article is What is the Third Legacy? And we'll go ahead and get started. Our 12-step, Carrying the Message, is the basic service that AA's fellowship gives. That is our principal aim and the main reason for our existence. Therefore, AA is more a set of principles, more than a set of principles. It is a society of alcoholics in action. We must carry the message, else we ourselves can wither, and those who haven't been given the truth will die. Hence, an AA service is anything whatever that helps us to reach a fellow sufferer, ranging all the way from the 12-step itself to a 10-cent phone call and a cup of coffee, to the AA's General Service Headquarters for national and international action. The sum total of all those services is our third legacy. So there can be a little confusion sometimes, carrying the message. All right, what is the message that we're going to be carrying? And is it 12-step work if we're not directly carrying the message, but we're carrying people to the message? And Bill answers that basically in this last sentence. He says all of it can be considered underneath the umbrella of our service legacy.
Sure.
So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Service includes meeting places, clubs, hospitals, and intergroup offices. They mean pamphlets, books, and good publicity of almost every description. They require committees, delegates, trustees, and conferences. And not to be forgotten, they need voluntary money contributions. These services, whether performed by individuals, groups, areas, or AA as a whole, are utterly vital to our existence and growth. Nor can we make AA simple by abolishing such services. We would only be asking for complication and confusion. Concerning any given service, we therefore pose but one question. Is this service really needed? If it is, then maintain it we must, or fail in our mission to those who seek AA. That is a very simple litmus test. A lot of us want, to do the AA bingo and, all kinds of other stuff. And he's basically saying, look, do you absolutely need it? If you absolutely need it, then we absolutely are going to support it.
Yeah. So I would imagine that depending on where you live, that doing bingo might be a huge attraction to some people. And actually be the reason that some people even show up. Whereas in another part of the country, it may just fall flat in its face and it'd be silly to try and continue it, right? It just depends on where you are.
Sure. Yeah, it can be cultural. What was big when I was just poking around in the early days was dances.
Yes.
The recovery dances. And they were always incredibly uncomfortable for me because I still had a ton of self-consciousness going on, but it was where you go. It was where you go to be cool and meet people, So
yeah,
I don't know whether that can be considered under the service umbrella or not, but we get involved in a lot of different things, and not all of them are bad.
I think one of them here in the Pacific Northwest, because of the terrain, is the campouts, the backpack trips, and the day hikes and so forth are a huge deal in the Pacific Northwest. And there is a lot of service work that is put into those. We've got my home group's got a camp out coming up here on the end of August, and to watch the service machine in action, putting all that together, and watch how everybody cooperates with each other and are joyful about doing it, is pretty cool. It's pretty cool to watch. And so it attracts a lot of people that would never normally show up to a meeting, and then they end up coming to the meetings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I miss camping. I'm going out on a tangent now, but there's tick-borne illnesses like crazy in the Northeast.
Yes.
I don't know if you have them in Oregon.
Not like you guys.
But I went out to cut some bushes the other day, and I found a deer tick on me that had dug in.
Ooh.
You send them out to the lab. They tell you in about a week and a half, what the tick had, and I've got anaplasmosis, and that's from like cutting a bush back. So like the camping or hunting or any going fly fishing or whatever.
Yeah.
It's just. It's completely out for me.
It's risky,
and it's because of the area that I'm in. It's kind of sad.
So what is that anaplant? Whatever you said it was.
So there's a number of things that these little deer ticks can inject you with. One is Lyme's disease,
right?
But there's a ton of other things, and you really have to send the ticks out if you can get them to find out just what you've been infected with. And there's Borrelia, you can get West Nile.
Wow.
I mean, there's all these different things, and there's parasites, all kinds of parasites that they can put into you. And you have to have these things tested. So most of the time it's doxycycline, which is the antibiotic that you got to get on. That'll do most things, but maybe not all, so you have to be careful. But,
oh, wow.
But I haven't camped in 20 years. And I miss it. I'm going to move out to Oregon, Monty.
Hey, yeah, there you go.
right, it says here the most vital yet the least understood group of services that AA has are those which enable us to function as a whole, namely the AA General Service Office, the AA Publishing Incorporated, the AA Grapevine Incorporated, and AA's Board of Trustees, recently renamed as the General Service Board of Alcoholics Anonymous. Our worldwide unity and much of our growth since the early times is directly traceable to this cluster of life-giving activities located since 1938 at New York. Until 1950, these overall services were the sole function of a few old-time AAs, several non-alcoholic friends, Dr. Bob and myself. For all the years of AA's infancy, we old-timers had been the self-appointed trustees for Alcoholics Anonymous. At last, we realized that AA had grown up, that our fellowship was ready and able to take these responsibilities from us. There was also another urgent reason for change. Since we old-timers couldn't live forever, newer trustees would be virtually unknown to the AA groups, now spread all over the whole earth. Without direct linkage to AA, future trustees couldn't possibly function alone. That meant that we had to form a conference representing our membership, which could meet yearly with our trustees at New York and thus assume direct responsibility for the guardianship of AA tradition and the direction of our principal service affairs. Otherwise, a virtually unknown board of trustees and our too little understood service headquarters operations would someday be bound to face collapse. That's really interesting. So he's saying that the conference was put together to shine light on what was going on in New York and to gain collaboration and approval. So that's really interesting. I'm wondering if it's still functioning the way Bill envisioned. I'm not that closely aligned with it these days to be able to answer that.
If that's still its purpose, yeah.
Yeah. Suppose acting quite on their own, the future trustees were to make a serious blunder. Well, they do. Suppose with no linkage to AA, they tried to act for us in a time of great trouble or crisis. With no direct guidance from AA as a whole, how could they do this? Collapse of our top services would then be inevitable. And if, under such conditions, our world services did fall apart, how could they ever be reconstructed? The trustees, Dr. Bob and I, finally saw in 1950 that this appalling risk must no longer be taken. A direct linkage between ourselves and AA had to be built, and it has. So exactly what it can impact and influence in New York is more limited than people would like to believe, but there is a linkage, and there is feedback from the groups that reaches New York, and I think that's a good thing. And then the information comes back from New York through the conference and through the DCMs and GSRs and everything back to the groups. So I'm not sure how if it was a Fortune 100 company, would the communication be the way it is now? Probably not, but there is that linkage, and we can be grateful for that because we'll at least know what the heck is going on.
Well, let me ask you, in the spirit of what you just said, has it been your experience that on some sort of consistent basis, you as a member of your home group, that you actually do hear from New York through your GSR?
No.
I was going to say the same thing.
Because my group doesn't have a GSR, unfortunately, right?
Okay.
So the linkage has to be connected.
Yeah.
The GSR has to be, going to the GSR meetings and meeting with the DCM. The DCM has to be, talking with the delegates. The delegates have to be talking to the trustees. There's a series of linkage of connections which makes this whole thing healthy.
You bet.
And if it's broken, and they're easily broken,
right.
You're not getting that feedback loop that Bill would like everyone to be able to have.
Yeah, that's what I was afraid of.
These were the conclusions that led to the formation of the General Service Conference of Alcoholics Anonymous, a body of about 75 elected delegates from the states and provinces of the United States and Canada. On a trial experiment experimental basis, these delegates come 51 to sit yearly at New York with our trustees and General Service staff members. This still happens. The General Service Conference of Alcoholics Anonymous has proved itself an immense success. Its record of achievement during its 4-year trial period has been completely convincing. Therefore, we who are the old-timers of AA are now entirely ready to deliver the principal affairs of Alcoholics Anonymous into the permanent keeping of this well-tried and tested body of AA members. Beginning, therefore, with our 20th anniversary in 1955, the third legacy of world service will henceforth be for all members of Alcoholics Anonymous to have and to hold for so long as God may wish our society to endure. There's Bill's frothy verbiage. I love it. One of the things, we've talked about this before, one of the things is General Service has embedded itself into New York City like a Kentucky tick. And the trustees have been, for the most part, embedded in New York City. And a criticism I have is what goes on in New York City does not go on in Kansas or North Dakota or Manitoba, Canada. You know what I mean? So if that feedback loop that we were talking about isn't working really well, what can happen is Alcoholics Anonymous can make decisions that goes at odds with the majority viewpoint of people, in the fellowship. And I see a couple of those things have happened recently. The majority of the fellowship would not like the big book to be rewritten.
Right.
The majority of the fellowship would not want Alcoholics Anonymous to sue to get back the original manuscript. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So things happen in New York that don't take part in a healthy feedback loop, from groups to conferences to General Service. But the system is there. The architecture is there. Bill built it pretty well.
Yeah, so if the architecture is there, that's all well and good, but if we're not camping out under the shelter of it, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Maybe it's time to design something that works, something online. You know what I mean, or something. We can take advantage of technology.
Well, that's what Lou G seems to think.
Yeah,
he is very pro technology, which I was kind of surprised, to tell you the truth. And I hate to say this, but just because of his generation, I was surprised to hear that.
Lou's as sharp as a tack. He really is. His original career was in business intelligence and things like that.
Oh, well, no wonder. Okay.
He knows what he's doing with that stuff, and they're lucky to have him.
Yeah.
and I love his perspective. He has no problem shaking the tree real hard when he thinks some of the coconuts need to fall off.
Yeah, either does Judy.
No. All right, so large print, the conference is born. So let's dig into that. It was one thing to say that we ought to have a General Service Conference, but it was quite another to devise a plan which would bring it into successful existence. The cost of holding such a conference was easily dismissed. Even though the outlay might be $20,000 for each yearly session, this would only be 15 cents a piece extra for each AA member, and mighty well worth it. What member wouldn't give that much to be sure that AA didn't collapse at its center in some future day or of some great need or crisis? One of the criticisms, Monty, is everything is $1 billion in New York City.
Yeah.
If you did all of this in Akron, Ohio, where there's empty buildings everywhere, it would be 10% of the cost.
Sure.
Sure. But it's never considered because of the embedded nature of the Kentucky tick we were talking about earlier.
Yep.
But how on earth were we going to cut down destructive politics with all its usual struggles for prestige and vainglory? How many delegates would be required, and from where should they come? Arrived at New York, how could they be related to the Board of Trustees. What would be their actual powers and duties? Whatever the plan, it had to be sound enough to work well on its first trial. No blunders big enough to create a fiasco could be allowed. With these several weighty considerations in mind and with some misgivings, I commenced work on a draft of a plan, much assisted by Helen B. of the office staff. Though the conference might be later enlarged to include the whole world, we felt that the first delegates should come from the United States and Canada only. Each state and province might be allowed one delegate. Those containing heavy AA populations could have additional representatives. To give the conference continuity, the delegates could be divided into panels. Panel 1, elected for 2 years, would be invited for 1951, the first year. Panel 2, elected for 2 years, would be seated in 1952. Thereafter, one panel would be elected and one would be retired yearly. This would cause the conference to rotate. The election of state and provincial committee members and delegates could take place at large centers of population within each state and province. Or, to save expense, such assemblies of group representatives could be held at annual state or provincial conventions. Okay, so he's talking about, the area has their assembly. The General Service Conference is the big thing. And Judy and Lou, we were talking about them earlier, they go to all the assemblies. They'll jump in a car and drive for 6 hours to go to one of those assemblies. But how could assemblies of group representatives choose their committee members and delegates without terrific political friction? As veterans of many a group hassle and intergroup brawl, we shivered. Then came a happy thought. We remembered that the usual election troubles were often caused by personal nominations, whether from the floor or from some committee issuing from a back room. Another main cause of trouble was to be seen in close elections, hotly contested. These nearly always left a large and discontented minority. So we devised the scheme of choosing committee members out of group assemblies by written ballot with no personal nominations at all. The committee would then be placed in front of the assembly, which could then elect from it the delegate to the conference in New York. But sure enough, this was going to be the hottest spot of all. How could we pull the inevitable election pressure down? To accomplish this, it was provided that a delegate must receive a 2/3 vote for election. If a delegate got a majority of this size, nobody could kick much. But if she didn't, and the election was close, what then? Well, perhaps the names of the 2 highest in the running, or the 3 officers of the committee, or even the whole committee could be put in a hat. One name would be drawn. The winner of this painless lottery would become the delegate. Since the high candidates in the running would all be good ones, we couldn't miss getting fine delegates by this method. One of my favorite delegates in the world got it by pulling it out of the hat. They
Really?
still do it this. They still do it this way. If it's not a 2/3 vote,
Yeah.
it goes to the hat. He was out of Colorado. Gary Kay. One of my he caused some trouble too. When he saw something that wasn't right, you knew about it.
Yeah.
He got behind the mic and he told you.
I love
He's
it.
one of my favorite guys. He's at the big meeting now. But when these delegates got to New York, what would they do there? We thought they would want to have real authority. So in the charter drawn from the conference itself, it was provided that the delegates could issue flat directions to the trustees on a 2/3 vote. And even a simple majority vote would constitute a mighty strong suggestion. It would become traditional, too, for the trustees thereafter to submit the names of all proposed board members to the conference for confirmation. This would give the conference an effective voice in the selection process. What he's doing now is he's giving us the first good chunk of what the concepts for world service became. And that's going to be later developed, probably further on in this book. But Bill came up with this really cool way of Alcoholics Anonymous and the feedback loop. All related, and how you can elect your people without a lot of controversy. And I mean, he was very, very far-seeing. Along with a temporary plan for financing the conference, we put these ideas and their detailed applications into a pamphlet called The Third Legacy. We shipped about 50,000 of these documents to the groups and asked them to form assemblies for the election of committee members and delegates. With Dr. Bob's approval, I stumped the country for the Third Legacy plan, talking to large AA audiences and watching assemblies select their delegates in more than 24 states and provinces. How well I remember that first tryout in Boston. The Irish turned out in force. To our amazement, the proceedings were as unruffled as a mill pond, even though ballot after ballot failed to get anybody a two-thirds majority for election as a delegate. The assembly finally drew lots among the whole committee, and out of the hat popped a mighty good delegate. Everybody was pleased and happy the heat was off. If the Irish could do it without a fight, anybody could. Right there we got the first glimmer that AA had begun to move from partisan politics into true statesmanship. I got to tell you, it's not partisan. Alcoholics Anonymous is the least partisan fellowship I've ever belonged to, I got to tell you. Much the same thing happened at all the other stops. About a third of the delegates chosen were real old-timers. The rest were active AAs sober 4 to 8 years. The large majority named were chosen by two-thirds vote, only a few of the elections being decided by lot, as Boston had. And when these few were so chosen, there was never any hard feeling. It was tremendously encouraging. The first conference was set for April 1951. In came the delegates. They looked over headquarters, cellar to garret, got acquainted with the service staff, shook hands with the trustees. That evening we gave them a briefing session under the name of What's on Your Mind? We answered scores of questions of all kinds. The delegates began to feel at home and reassured. Seeing so much quick understanding and increased confidence, our spirits rose. To a man, we sensed that something very big was happening. One strenuous conference session followed after another. The delegates overhauled our finances with a microscope. After listening to reports from the Board of Trustees and from all the services, there was warm but cordial debate on many questions of AA policy. The trustees submitted several of their own serious problems for the opinion of the conference. Feeling that everybody was too polite, we set up something called the Gripe Box. Nothing but excellent questions were dropped into it. Nobody was mad about anything, believe it or not. The gripe box. There's always a suggestion box, at workshops or something like that, Monty, and some of them can really be something. So we went session after session, morning, afternoon, and evening. The delegates handled several tough puzzles about which at headquarters we at headquarters were in doubt, sometimes giving advice contrary to our own conclusions. In nearly every instance, we saw that they were right. Then and there, they proved as never before that the AA's tradition, too, was correct. The group conscience could safely act as the sole authority and sure guide for Alcoholics Anonymous. Wow, what a humble move that is. The groups came in and told them how they could do something that they were confused about.
Yeah.
Nobody present will ever forget that final session of the first conference. We knew that the impossible had happened, that AA could never break down in the middle, that Alcoholics Anonymous was at last safe from any storm the future might bring, and as the delegates returned home, they carried this same conviction with them. Realizing our need for funds and better literature circulation, some did place a little too much emphasis on this necessity. Others were a little discouraged, wondering why fellow members did not take fire as they had. They forgot that they themselves had been eyewitnesses to the conference and that their fellow alcoholics hadn't. But both here and at home, they made an impression much greater than they knew. The interest of a great numbers of AA groups commenced to deepen, something which has continued in all the 4 conferences years since. All right, so yeah, they had it every year. In the midst of this exciting turn of affairs, the conference agreed that the Alcoholic Foundation ought to be renamed as the General Service Board of Alcoholics Anonymous, and this was done. The word foundation stood for charity, paternalism, and maybe big money. AA would have none of these. From here out, we would assume full responsibility and pay our expenses ourselves. As I watched all this grow, I became entirely sure that Alcoholics Anonymous was safe at last, even from me. Nearly all of the last dozen years of my life have been invested in the construction of our general headquarters. My heart is there and always will be. AA's headquarters seems that important to me. When, therefore, the hour comes at St. Louis for me to turn over to you this last great asset of the AA inheritance, I shall feel not a little sad that I must no longer be your headquarters handyman, but I shall rejoice that Alcoholics Anonymous has now grown up and through its great conference can confidently take its destiny by the hand. So, my dear friends, you now have read my final accounting to you for the world services of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Wow.
A lot of great information in there, Monty.
Yeah. So I got a couple questions for you. I like your opinion on a couple of things. So this reading this article makes me think of the concept of the upside down triangle as far as leadership or servanthood, let's say, goes. So ideally, what we're looking at is decisions are made at group level and taken back to New York. Ideally, right?
Ideally.
In a perfect world. What do you think about groups that go rogue? Do you know what I mean by that? That they don't necessarily register, or they don't register. They're not in the schedule for their district, and they've just chosen to do their own thing. Do you think that hurts AA as a whole in any way, or do you think that's an okay thing to do?
So, when anyone, anywhere, any two or more people with a big book,
Right.
can start a group of Alcoholics Anonymous. I've had some personal challenges with some of this, and I'll share those with you. So, in the late '90s, we started a big book group, and very quickly, big book groups became super popular in Area 44. That's my area, okay, and District 18 was my district. So they became really popular, and I got to tell you, 2 out of 3 meetings that were starting were big book meetings, and it freaked people out at the intergroup. And what they did was they started to unfairly question and make demands on these groups that were expressly designed to make it really hard for you to get in the book. Okay, because one more big book meeting, So there's a number of these big book groups that just finally told them to go pound, and we're operating outside of the structure they didn't have a GSR. They didn't have people reporting from the district or the area, and it was because they were uninvited. Basically, it wasn't because they didn't want to be a part of the structure. They were unfairly prejudiced against by the people that were in charge of the intergroup at that time. So I've had that personal experience. But there are people who don't want to follow the traditions, who want to be a hookup spot for some of the group founders, and really want to operate outside of the spirituality inherent in most AA groups. And the issue is AA can take no punitive action against those groups or those individuals.
Yeah.
They can send a sharp letter at best, to people who are breaking their anonymity or whatever, right? So that's kind of what's going on. The healthiest group is a 3 legacy group, a group that pays attention to the steps, pays attention to the traditions, and supports and fills the slots for the service functions in the group. That's the healthiest group. Those group, because they're following the spiritual principles, tend to survive longer.
Okay, all right. So I'm watching. I'm watching a group, what I would consider semi-rogue. I don't know that they have a GSR. I wouldn't want to be quoted on that. It doesn't seem like there is. But they refuse to be in the schedule because their location changes from winter to summer, and back and forth, the same two locations. That's one of the reasons. I'm not sure. I don't know why that's a problem because the schedule gets reprinted on a pretty regular basis. So I don't know why they've chosen not to. They seem to apply the traditions within their group really well, as far like somebody would apply the traditions in their personal life. You know what I mean? I will tell you that as fellowship meetings go in this part of the country, this is one of the healthiest groups I have seen in years. Spiritually, the relationship with God that the people are developing, the guidance that's it's kind of an anomaly. I'm surprised it's lasted quite a while, and I think that it's probably the exception. I'm thinking.
Yeah, the question I would ask, and it's probably the question that Bill would ask: are people getting better there?
Yes. Hey, from what I've seen, absolutely. People aren't only getting better; they're constantly improving. Mm-hmm. They're working a program with sponsors. Then they're becoming sponsors, and their people are becoming sponsors. And I mean, it's so the people that are coming out of that meeting, their personal life is there's some people that I would go, I want to be more like that guy. And like I said, though, it seems to be the exception, I think.
Yeah. Listen, my experience with the Big Book movement. I'm calling it the Big Book movement because that's what the people who hate it call it, right? When the Big Book movement really took off in the thousands, and they were trying to keep all of them out of the book.
Yeah.
There were people that were recovering from alcoholism at that group who had been to 50 other groups and never got any traction. And they show up at the Big Book group where someone is pretty insistent that they actually take the 12 steps and they recover. And so we were doing good stuff. Is that group for everybody? No. Is that group for the people who just want to sponsor two guys and play golf with them once a month? No, that's not the right group for them.
Right.
But some of the people who were in real trouble with alcoholism, responded unbelievably to these groups that they were trying to keep out of the book because they saw them as something that was dangerous to unity for some crazy reason.
Wow. I would think that if you knew the book, you would see how beneficial it was to unity. But maybe some people don't know the book.
They were much more closely aligned with Living Sober or the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions than they were the Big Book. This goes all the way back to the problem that you and I have talked about, that a lot of people in the service structure have not had an awakened spirit as the result of the 12 steps.
Yeah.
Their thinking has not been placed on a much higher plane.
Right.
You understand that, and their character defects are still monstrously active, and they're in the service structure, and I don't think there's anything you can do about that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just, it is what it is.
Well, listen, I'd like to close out this episode by asking you a question that was asked of me. And we talked about this before, and you've shared this before, and you do a good job of it. So I was going to present it to you. I've got a good friend who is in the fellowship who asked my opinion on the book Living Sober. And I gave my opinion, and then I stopped and I said, okay, I'm going to ask Chris to kind of explain this because we're on the same page with this. Share your take on living sober.
All right,
And
I will at the risk of offending anyone. Right, I will share my opinion because you're asking.
yeah,
I think it's an important book for heavy drinkers. I think if you respond to living sober like it's the new gospel, for your alcohol problem, you're probably a heavy drinker. If you respond to the book Alcoholics Anonymous, like, oh, I can't believe all this great information in here. This is me, then you're probably an alcoholic. So, is it good for people with problems with alcohol? Excuse me. Is it good with people who have drinking problems to get some kind of help from a book called Living Sober? Yes, it's good. Uh, I'm all for it. Just don't mess with me and my big book, and I won't
gotcha.
mess with you and your living sober. Okay, how's that for a deal?
That sounds good to me. Now, so my take on it is, if you're not powerless, it's kind of like saying what you're saying. If you're not powerless over alcohol, if you're a heavy drinker, not an alcoholic, if you have power, then Living Sober is a great book. But if you're powerless, if left to your own devices, you have no power over your alcohol issues, then Living Sober probably is only going to take you so far.
You're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
I'm saying.
Yeah.
Alcoholics are powerless
Right.
over alcohol.
Right.
Heavy drinkers have problems with alcohol, and it's a very, very different solution. Most treatment centers out there that are successful with people are successful with heavy drinkers.
Yes.
What happens with real alcoholics is if they think treatment is really treating them and they're going to get out of there and they've been treated and everything should be fine, they're going to be drunk again in no time, because they're powerless over alcohol.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's tons of people out there getting DUIs and wrecking cars and getting divorces and getting fired.
Sure.
Who have drinking problems.
They're not alcoholic.
So,
yeah.
right.
So in the spirit of this article and the conference and all that stuff and conference approved literature, wasn't there a story about this kind of Living Sober kind of squeaked under the door?
So this is what I've heard, and I don't go back to the foundational documents that prove this. I hear it from word of mouth. But it was right around the time of Bill Wilson's death. The guy who wrote Living Sober was very good friends with Lois. As Bill Wilson is dying, it's up for, it's up in front of for approval from, the conference. And what was approved it was approved that someone could go ahead and write it. It was not approved once it was written. So the proposal was approved. So can you write a book Living Sober? Can you get started on something like that? Yes. Did they get a chance to read it before it was approved? No, because there was a lot of turmoil right around the time Bill was dying.
Sure.
And this guy was like best friends with Lois.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it kind of got squeaked in there. There's been people who've wanted to pull it from the conference approved list, and maybe even a majority of people in the country would want that, maybe, but it's never gained enough traction to actually have it happen. And I think they make money on all the literature. They're going to make money on Living Sober.
Sure.
And I'm telling you, my whole opinion on it has changed over the years. I have a much more open mind today. I think, like a lot of the pamphlets, a lot of the crazy literature we have, I'm just more open-minded than I used to be. How do I know that's not going to be really helpful to somebody?
We have literature that are read in meetings all the time that people think are conference approved but aren't. Daily Reflections is one of them. I think the 24-Hour Day Book's another one. That is a real popular one, the little black book, and there's nothing bad in any of them. And if you've recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, they're all great additions to your devotional life. I mean, they're tremendous writings. I'm still overly opinionated about most things. My wife says I'm softening a little bit, but I don't know that I am, but we'll see. That's kind of the nature of doing radio and podcasts, I guess. We got to be opinionated, right?
Actually, in truth of fact, we rarely judge. We're all we really do, Monty, is report.
And I am finding myself, I mean, maybe this is what my wife is talking about. I'm finding myself quite often saying, "Yeah, but who am I?"
You soften up as you get older. We're both getting up there, and you pick your fights a lot more carefully. The older you get.
Yeah. So we'll continue to observe and report because that's our job, and we'll lay it at the feet of the listeners, and they can do with what they will.
Absolutely.
All right, Chris. Thank you so much for another fine episode. We will see you next week when we tackle the article Guardian of AA, our General Service Conference.
Oh, boy.
Oh, boy. All right. Chris, thank you once again. Listeners, make sure you listen to the very end so you can find out how to catch up on all of these shows. Until our next broadcast, this is the Monty'man along with Chris S., and we are wishing God's perfect serenity for you. For more recovery workshops with Chris S. and the Monty'man, visit our website at take12radio.com and click on the Recovery Workshops banner.
This has been a broadcast of Take 12 Recovery Radio and KHLT Recovery Broadcasting.
Kitty, 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 kitty. Meow, meow, meow.
Woof.